Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are going to get right into the pretty complex relationship between alcohol and our body's fat metabolism. We're going to follow the entire journey of fat, see why it's our body's absolute best fuel source, and then we'll see how something like alcohol can throw a massive wrench into the works, turning a simple metabolic shift into some pretty serious liver disease.
All right, so here's our game plan. First up, we'll see why fat is the king of fuels. Then, we'll figure out how we actually unlock all that stored energy. After that, we're going to push the system into overload and see what breaks. Then, it's a cruise down the cholesterol highway. And finally, we'll connect all these tiny molecules to the major diseases they can cause. Let's get into it.
So, Section 1, Fat, the ultimate fuel. You have to wonder, right? Why did our bodies, through millions of years of evolution, decide that fat was the best thing for our long-term energy savings account?
Well, the very first clue is right here, and it's a big one: energy density. Fat packs a whopping 9 calories into every single gram. That is more than double what you get from carbs or proteins. It's not even close.
And this slide really puts the genius of our body's design on full display. See, fat is stored as these things called triacylglycerols. And not only are they super energy dense, but they're stored anhydrously, which is just a fancy way of saying they don't have any water attached. Now compare that to glycogen, which is our go-to for short-term fuel. For every gram of glycogen, you're also storing about 2 grams of water. That makes it incredibly bulky and heavy. From an evolutionary perspective, being able to carry our fuel as lightweight fat was a huge advantage.
And this just puts it all into perspective. The source material actually did the math on this. If we stored all our long-term energy as glycogen instead of fat, the average person would be carrying around an extra 55 kilograms. That's about 120 pounds. It's just an incredible feat of biological engineering when you think about it.
Okay, so we've got this amazingly efficient fuel, but how do we actually use it? That brings us right to Section 2, Unlocking Stored Energy. We're going to see exactly how we get that fat from our storage tissues, like adipose tissue, into the cells that are crying out for power. So the whole process kicks off with something called lipolysis. You can think of it as the body literally unlocking its fat stores. And there's a key enzyme here called hormone-sensitive lipase that acts like a gatekeeper. When we need energy, let's say we're exercising, hormones like epinephrine give it the green light to start breaking down fat. But when we've just eaten a meal, insulin comes along and signals it to stop because, hey, we've got plenty of fuel from our food. It's this really beautiful, tightly regulated system.
So once a fatty acid actually gets inside a cell, it has to be burned for fuel. And this happens in 3 main steps. First, it gets activated in the cell's main fluid area, the cytosol. Second, it gets transported by a special carrier called the carnitine shuttle, which moves it into the mitochondria, the cell's powerhouse. And finally, once it's inside the mitochondria, it goes through beta-oxidation, where it's systematically chopped up into these little 2-carbon energy packets called acetyl-CoA.
And I really want to stress this. This pathway is absolutely vital. A single faulty enzyme in this process can be devastating. For instance, a deficiency in an enzyme called MCAD has been linked to sudden infant death syndrome. Think about it. When a baby's blood sugar drops between feedings, their body has to switch over to burning fat. If that switch fails because an enzyme isn't working, the consequences can be tragic. And that brings us to Section 3, Metabolic Overload. So what happens when this whole system gets pushed way past its limits? What happens when we start breaking down more fat than our cells can possibly handle?
Let's frame it as a question. What actually happens when fatty acid oxidation is running so fast that it's producing way more acetyl-CoA than the body can immediately use in its main energy cycle? Where does it all go?
Well, the liver has a really clever solution. It takes all that extra acetyl-CoA and converts it into what we call ketone bodies. The best way to think of these is as water-soluble, mail-order fuel that can be shipped all over the body through the blood. And this is so important for the brain, which can't use fat directly, but absolutely loves running on ketones, especially during periods of fasting or starvation.
But this overload state can get dangerous. In conditions like starvation or uncontrolled diabetes, you get ketosis, which is a big buildup of these acidic ketone bodies. And this is exactly where alcohol comes in and hijacks the entire system. See, when you drink, your liver drops everything to metabolize the alcohol because its byproduct, acetaldehyde, is toxic. This process generates a huge surplus of a molecule called NADH. Now, all that NADH sends a false signal to the cell, basically screaming, "We're full of energy, stop burning fuel." And this brings fatty acid oxidation to a screeching halt. All the fatty acids that should have been burned for energy now have nowhere to go. So what does the liver do? It just repackages them as fat, leading directly to the condition we know as fatty liver.
Okay, let's totally shift gears now. We've talked a lot about breaking down fats, but how does it get around the body to begin with? You know, fat and water don't mix, so how in the world do we transport it through our watery bloodstream? This is the topic of Section 4, the cholesterol highway.
The answer is lipoproteins, and the taxicab analogy is perfect. These molecules package insoluble stuff like cholesterol and fat inside a shell of proteins and phospholipids. This makes the whole package water-soluble, so it can travel easily through the plasma to wherever it needs to go.
And here they are, the two most famous of these taxicabs. You've got LDL, low-density lipoprotein, which we call the bad cholesterol. It's like a delivery truck, dropping off cholesterol from the liver to all the other tissues. Then you have HDL, high-density lipoprotein, the good cholesterol. HDL is the cleanup crew. It goes around, picks up any excess cholesterol from the tissues, and brings it back to the liver for disposal.
So how do cells actually grab the cholesterol from an LDL particle? They use these little gatekeepers on their surface called LDL receptors. Now, if there's a genetic defect in these receptors, the LDL can't deliver its cargo. It just stays stuck in the blood, and the levels of cholesterol skyrocket, leading to a massive risk for atherosclerosis, which is the hardening of your arteries.
And that leads us perfectly into our final section, Section 5, From Molecules to Malady. This is where we're going to tie all these biochemical pathways we've been talking about directly to the major diseases they cause when things go wrong.
When it comes to cardiovascular disease, the main culprit really boils down to this simple but deadly equation. High LDL cholesterol leads to atherosclerosis. Over time, that excess cholesterol gets deposited in your artery walls. It forms plaques that harden and narrow the vessels, and that can ultimately lead to heart attacks and strokes.
And you know, it's not just about cholesterol. There's a whole host of inherited diseases that are caused by just a single broken enzyme in lipid metabolism. In diseases like Niemann-Pick, Gaucher's, and Krabbe's, you see specific lipids building up to toxic levels inside cells, often with really devastating neurological consequences. It's just a tragic reminder of how incredibly precise this whole system needs to be.
So, from energy storage all the way to disease, it's clear that your lipid profile tells a profound story about your metabolic health. It's this dynamic, delicate balance of synthesis, breakdown, and transport. So the final question I have for you to think about is, what is your story saying?